They thought humans were weak. The Galactic Union's High Council debated Earth, only briefly. Class 3 designation. Oxygen-rich. Primitive weapons. Feral population centered on tribal identities. The only notable data point, an unusually high number of apex-level predator species living within close proximity to humans. That was noted, filed, and ultimately dismissed. No planet with that much dangerous wildlife could produce an advanced civilization. The risk, they assumed, was to the wildlife, not to the humans. That assumption died the moment the distress call came through. No image. Just static and a voice, cracked, strained, and shaking. They control them. The death beasts. They command the death beasts. Do not make contact. Then silence. That transmission wasn't traced back to an outpost or war zone. It came from a research vessel sent to conduct peaceful contact with a rural settlement in the Terran Northern Hemisphere. No follow-up transmission. No survivors. The ship's emergency beacon activated just once. When a scout drone arrived, it found the ship dark, intact, and empty. No damage. No bodies. No evidence of struggle. Just an eerie calmness. Every system powered down except a glowing screen displaying the message. "She's a good girl, isn't she?" The video file attached lasted 4 seconds. A large canine. Yellow eyes. Wagging tail. Teeth like spears. Standing calmly beside a human child. The Galactic Council convened a second emergency session. This time, the Earth discussion lasted longer. They reviewed imagery collected from across the planet. It showed humans in close physical proximity to species categorized as high-level threat entities: Canis lupus, Panthera tigris, Ursus arctos horribilis. Domesticated. Controlled. Obeying. "How are they not being hunted?" one council member asked, staring at footage of a human child throwing a stick. The large animal retrieved it and sat obediently. Another spoke quietly. "That species commands apex predators as if they are servants. It wasn't natural. Not by galactic standards." The council requested further review. The Terran archives opened reluctantly, slowly, under mutual exchange agreements. What they discovered made their blood freeze. There were names. Rex, Luna, Shadow, Whiskers. Individualized identifiers assigned to beasts that could dismember a grown being in seconds. They were not farmed. Not contained. Not used as food. These predators lived inside human homes. Slept on human furniture. Protected human offspring. Some were trained to detect disease, find explosives, even comfort their owners during emotional breakdowns. All while having the physical capacity to kill with a single movement. It didn't make sense. If an alien species attempted to domesticate a similarly dangerous animal, the process took decades of genetic modification, shock conditioning, and biochemical suppression. Yet humans had been doing it since their species crawled out of the ice ages, without augmentation. Through willpower. Through strange vocal tones. Through some unknowable emotional bond. Worse still, the creatures liked it. They licked their handlers. They followed commands. They waited patiently when told to sit. They grieved when their humans died. It was unnatural. Unsettling. The data got darker. Historical archives revealed humans not only lived beside predators, they built legends around them. Egyptian gods shaped like felines. Norse warriors buried with their hounds. Mongol armies who rode with hawks. Even modern humans posted billions of images and videos celebrating their interactions with creatures that should, by all logic, be lethal to them. The council analyzed thousands of hours of footage, hoping to identify patterns, vulnerabilities, something to explain the anomaly. What they found instead was more terrifying. Humans didn't fear their predators. They loved them. One clip showed a bear cub playing in the snow, gently swatted by a human. Laughter followed. Another showed a giant snake curled around a human's torso. The human was asleep. Breathing slowly. Peacefully. The creature made no move to tighten. Only protected. Another video was darker. A mountain lion approached a lone hiker. The hiker raised her arms and yelled. The cat backed off. No weapons. No panic. Just confidence. Are they insane? An alien analyst whispered. No, another replied. They're dominant. Even over nature itself. Psychological profiling of human behavior confirmed the Council's worst fears. The species developed early survival instincts that rejected submission. Where other species fled from danger, humans studied it. Where others avoided predators, humans followed them, observed them, mimicked them. Over generations, they didn't just learn to coexist with monsters, they learned to lead them. And the monsters followed. Theories arose. Maybe it was pheromones. Maybe humans used subtle brain manipulation or telepathy. Maybe their primitive vocal tones were laced with chemical triggers. None of it held up under scrutiny. Every test, every simulation, every probe into the nature of human-animal interaction pointed to the same horrifying truth: the bond was real. Mutual. Built on something aliens couldn't quantify. Trust. Some researchers called it madness. Others called it power. One labeled it as something else entirely. This is not domestication. This is worship. These animals worship their humans. And the humans, in turn, become gods to them. The final report was filed under emergency classification: do not engage. Observe from orbit only. Avoid contact until more is understood. But even that came too late. Another vessel went silent. No destruction. No survivors. The only sign of activity, a small pod ejected hours later. Inside was a terrified alien soldier, shivering, eyes dilated. She said only one thing before slipping into a coma. It smiled at me. The beast smiled. Later analysis confirmed her team had attempted contact with a suburban family. They were greeted by two adults, a child, and a dog. The dog had approached slowly, tail wagging. It sat. It barked once. The humans told it to stay. And it did. But only until they gave the command. The command that would never be forgotten. Protect. That was the last word recorded on the black box. It was a word spoken with warmth. With love. With absolute certainty. The kind of command no creature should obey blindly, except Earth's death beasts did. And the humans watched with quiet eyes. The incident spread like wildfire across the galactic channels. The first casualty of the new human enigma had been recorded, and it was only a matter of time before other species began to fear the reports emerging from Earth. The second wave of data confirmed what the Council had feared. It wasn't just one group of humans that had been involved. It was every human. More bodies, more ships, and more crews were reported lost in the same way. Some tried to salvage what was left of the human-controlled systems, but it was all the same. They met their end with terrifying consistency. The beast did not relent. The human command was always followed. The Council gathered, and for the first time in history, they had no solutions. They faced a species capable of not only commanding creatures that should have been beyond control, but also of changing the rules of engagement in ways that left them powerless. It wasn't long before a report came in that gave a brief description of what happened when a scout vessel attempted to make direct contact with a human colony. They had tried everything. Weapons were deployed. Biosensors went into overload trying to detect the humans' weaknesses. No trace of fear could be detected. No evidence of vulnerability. The humans lived as if the threats of the universe did not concern them at all. Human settlements had sprawled across the surface of Earth like a patchwork quilt. Each region was dotted with both people and their trained companions, cats, dogs, hawks, even some creatures once thought extinct in other parts of the galaxy, cohabited with them. The more the Council researched, the more unnerving the reports became. Every form of predatory behavior from the beasts that called Earth home was subdued by a single mechanism: human command. But how? How could a creature that had only recently evolved from an animalistic past exert this kind of control over the wildest, most lethal of species? Not just control in a superficial way, but complete, absolute obedience, as if every part of the wild animal was bound to follow, bound by invisible strings? This question would linger with every observer as they combed through data. It wasn't just the presence of humans that affected the beasts, it was the psychology. The study of what drove the animals to comply was baffling. A few attempts were made to understand it biologically, but nothing concrete could explain the truth of the phenomenon. One thing was clear: these beasts were not coerced. They weren't trained by any traditional means. They did not respond to external fear or pain. Instead, something deeper was at play, a force of will, an emotional bond that had evolved between the human and their companions. The fear set in. Entire fleets had lost their nerve when they saw the footage of humans not just surviving, but thriving in the midst of some of the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. Alien warlords, once known for their strength and ruthlessness, cowered when faced with the stories of how humans and their beastly companions had formed bonds that defied all understanding. How could something so primitive hold such power? There were murmurs in the council chambers. Questions floated like poisoned air. What else could humans do that no one had ever considered? How else might they twist the rules of reality to their favor? The idea that a species had the audacity to control not only their natural environment, but also the predators of the galaxy created a kind of existential dread. It was as if Earth had become the ultimate proving ground for survival, where humanity had mastered life and death itself. If humans could do this to creatures so terrifying, what could they do with weapons, with technology? And worse still, what would happen if their pets turned on them? The theory that humans were somehow binding these creatures to themselves through sheer force of will spread quickly, but the consequences were already too late to reverse. One chilling conclusion spread across the interstellar reports: this bond, this connection, wasn't just psychological, it was biological, an innate part of the human species. Every species had instincts that governed their behaviors, but humans? They had a different kind of instinct, one that resonated beyond what could be measured by mere technology. They were a living anomaly. The species the galaxy had written off as weak and insignificant had turned the tables. They weren't just surviving among predators, they were thriving. They had become something much more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. No longer a species to be written off as primitive, humanity had become a quiet force in the galaxy. They commanded nature, shaped it to their will, and lived alongside the very creatures that had once threatened them. At the heart of it all was something that shook the core of every alien race: the unspoken truth that humanity, in its unyielding will to live and to bond, had evolved into the ultimate manipulator of the living universe. They understood something fundamental, something that no species, no matter how technologically advanced, could touch. It wasn't enough to be smart, or strong, or quick. It was the heart of the human spirit, unbreakable, unyielding, and something that could not be bound by mere science or technology. And that bond had been formed with the most terrifying of creatures, the beasts of Earth. These beasts were not subjugated, they were allies, partners, companions. They followed the command of their human counterparts because they had been chosen, not through violence, not through force, but through something that transcended what anyone had expected of the human species. This realization sent ripples through the council. The humans were not just surviving with their beasts, they were mastering them, changing the relationship between predator and prey. The galaxy had been too quick to dismiss Earth as a backwater planet with nothing more than primitive species. But what they had failed to see was that the bond between humanity and the beasts was a microcosm of something far grander. If humanity could control the apex predators of their homeworld, what else could they do? Could they control the galaxy's most formidable creatures as well? Could they bend the will of the universe's most dangerous forces to their command? This thought lingered in the minds of those who dared to consider the implications. It was a terrifying prospect, one that could change everything the galaxy thought it knew about the power dynamics in the cosmos. And the most chilling part? Humanity hadn't even begun to show its true potential. The Council was now looking at something much larger than just a species of Earth. They were facing an unknown variable that could shift the power balance of the entire galaxy. The feeling of dread among the Council was palpable. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology, wasn't their intellect. It was something far older, far more primal: the ability to tame, to bond, and to make even the most terrifying creatures of the galaxy bow to their will. The discovery sent shockwaves through the galaxy. For years, the Council had prided itself on its control over interstellar relations, its power, and its ability to assess and manage threats. But when the data from Earth reached them, it was clear that they were dealing with a force beyond their comprehension. Humanity had risen from the ashes of their primitive ancestors to wield power that bent not only the laws of biology, but also the very fabric of galactic dominance. What should have been a simple exploration mission had turned into a nightmare, a realization that Earth was no longer just another backwater planet. It was a ticking time bomb that could, with the right command, bring even the mightiest empires to their knees. The Council had underestimated the humans. What was first thought to be mere coincidence, the idea that humans could coexist with their creatures, that they had developed a bond so strong that even the most dangerous of beasts obeyed them, was now recognized as a terrifying anomaly. But the implications of this realization were more profound than anyone had imagined. The underlying question no one dared to ask out loud was simple, yet it burned with a quiet terror. If humanity could control creatures so fearsome, what else could they control? Galactic history had shown that civilizations that could tame nature often dominated those that couldn't. Humans had done just that, but they had taken it further. It wasn't just a matter of mastering the environment, they had become one with it, bending the primal forces of nature to their will. The most dangerous predators that had once roamed the planet, creatures that had been feared even by other species, now served as companions, allies, and instruments of human intent. The entire concept of predator and prey had been turned upside down. As the Council convened in an emergency session, there was a palpable fear in the air. The consensus was unanimous. Humanity represented a threat not just because of their military potential or technological prowess, but because of something far deeper, a natural force of will that could not be understood or predicted. It was this human will that had forged an unprecedented connection between the species of Earth and the wildest of their animals. What made it worse was the fact that this bond was not something that could be replicated, nor could it be countered. There were no defenses against it, no amount of technology that could be deployed to break it. Humanity had mastered the art of unity, not just with their fellow humans, but with the beasts they had once been at odds with. The galaxy had always been a place of fear and survival. For millennia, species had fought for dominance, claiming territories and expanding their influence, often at the expense of others. But humanity had changed the game entirely. The bond they had with their creatures was not just physical, it was psychological. Their predators had come to see humans not as rivals or prey, but as leaders, as allies in a grander, more complex ecosystem. This bond between human and beast wasn't about control in the traditional sense. It was about something much more profound. The animals didn't just obey because they were commanded to, they followed because, in some deeper way, they trusted humanity. It was a partnership that had evolved over centuries, rooted in mutual respect and necessity. For the Council, this understanding was a bitter pill to swallow. How could a species so young, so seemingly insignificant, command such a profound bond with nature? The humans had done what even the most advanced species had failed to accomplish. They had bridged the gap between civilization and the untamed, between intelligence and instinct. And it was this mastery over the primal forces of life that made them a force to be reckoned with. For the first time, the Council realized that the greatest threat from humanity was not their weapons, not their technology, but their ability to inspire trust, to forge unbreakable bonds with creatures that would otherwise tear apart anyone who dared to face them. In the weeks that followed, reports came in of human teams venturing into alien territories. At first, the creatures they encountered on other planets had resisted, ferocious, hostile beings that had no reason to trust these interlopers. But humans weren't simply relying on their weapons or their technology to overpower these creatures. They were relying on the same instincts that had worked for them back on Earth, the ability to form connections, to calm the wildest of beasts, to earn the respect of the most dangerous predators in the universe. Slowly, but surely, humanity's presence in foreign territories grew, not through military force, but through a quiet, determined influence over the creatures that inhabited these new worlds. The galaxy watched in growing unease as humans tamed the wildest beings of far-flung planets. It wasn't a show of strength, not in the conventional sense. It wasn't about weapons or dominance. It was about a quiet power, an unspoken understanding between humans and the beasts they had allied with. The humans didn't seek to conquer, they sought to understand. And in doing so, they had become something the galaxy had never seen before, an unknown, untamable force that no one knew how to combat. This new understanding of human nature had profound consequences for how the galaxy viewed humanity. It wasn't just that they had figured out how to tame nature, it was that they had redefined the relationship between life forms. What had once been seen as a brutal competition for survival was now a complex web of interdependence. No longer were humans the prey of the universe. No longer were they helpless in the face of the vastness of space and the dangers it contained. They had become an equal, and more than that, a force that could reshape the dynamics of galactic power. For the first time in history, the Council had no answers. The galaxy had always believed that power came from strength, from technology, from the ability to crush others beneath your heel. But humanity had proven that there was another kind of power, a quieter, more profound one that bent the rules of survival and war. The animals that had once been predators had now become partners, allies, and protectors. What would happen when humanity took this bond to the stars? What would happen when they brought the galaxy's most dangerous creatures under their command, not as instruments of war, but as agents of peace, as guardians of a new order? As the Council pondered these questions, one thing became painfully clear: humanity had already begun to change the galaxy. And there was nothing anyone could do to stop them. The bond they had forged with their creatures was just the beginning. What would come next could not be predicted, and that uncertainty was what made humanity the most dangerous species in the universe. They had mastered the wild, but their true power lay in their ability to make the universe bend to their will, one bond at a time. The tremors of humanity's rise and power spread across the galaxy like wildfire, igniting both fear and admiration in its wake. What had once been viewed as a curiosity, a primitive, relatively insignificant species on the fringes of the galaxy, had suddenly grown into something much more profound. No longer was Earth merely another world struggling for survival. Humanity had become a central force, one that demanded attention. Their mastery over their predators had not only reshaped their relationship with the planet they called home, but it had also proven that they could master the greatest of galactic forces, the creatures that many believed were beyond anyone's control. Yet humanity had proven the opposite. These predators, creatures once feared and loathed, now followed them, revered them, and even protected them. The knowledge that humans had this ability, this inexplicable connection with the wildest of beings, sent a chilling message to every corner of the galaxy. The Council's early response had been one of skepticism. At first, the reports coming from Earth were dismissed as mere myth, exaggerated stories meant to entertain or distract. But as more and more examples emerged, the truth could no longer be denied. Humans had tamed their world's predators, turning deadly beasts into companions and guardians. And as their reach extended beyond Earth, humanity began to do the same with alien creatures. They didn't subdue or enslave these beings, they forged bonds that defied understanding, bringing creatures that had once been the stuff of nightmares into their fold. To the galaxy's more advanced species, this was something that couldn't be allowed to continue. There was a deep-seated terror in the realization that humanity's rise wasn't dependent on their technology or military might alone. It was rooted in their ability to connect, to form alliances with the natural world in a way that no other species had ever done before. What made this even more unsettling was the fact that humanity wasn't using this power as a weapon in the traditional sense. There was no conquest, no bloodshed. They didn't need to dominate. Instead, they shared a profound, almost spiritual relationship with their creatures, one that was based on mutual respect, understanding, and even love. This wasn't just mastery over animals. It was a form of unity that resonated deeply with the creatures of the galaxy, even those from entirely different worlds. As the reports continued to flood in, each one more astonishing than the last, the political elite of the galaxy grew increasingly desperate. Humanity wasn't just surviving in the galaxy. They were thriving, and they were doing so in a way that no one had expected. They were building alliances with beings that others had deemed too dangerous to approach, and in doing so, they were earning something far more valuable than the mere submission of these creatures. They were earning their trust. And in the complex politics of the galaxy, trust was everything. Trust was what held empires together, what made allies of enemies, what kept fragile peace agreements intact. And humanity had gained the trust of the most dangerous beings in existence. For the first time, the Council found itself powerless. The usual tactics of manipulation, force, and subjugation had no effect on humanity. They couldn't be bullied into submission, and they couldn't be intimidated by threats of war or destruction. They were a species that had learned how to tame not just the creatures of their own world, but the very forces of nature itself. Their ability to communicate, to bond with the wild, gave them an edge that no other species had. It wasn't just a matter of power, it was a matter of something deeper, something innate in humanity that made them different from every other species. They had evolved in a way that allowed them to connect with the natural world in ways no other species could understand. And it was this connection that made them a force to be reckoned with. But the question on everyone's mind remained, what would humanity do with this power? The fear that had begun to take root in the hearts of the galaxy's more established civilizations grew stronger each day. They had watched as humans built alliances with beasts from their homeworld and then began to do the same with creatures from across the stars. What would happen when humanity began to mobilize this power on a galactic scale? What would happen when they had an army not of soldiers, but of beasts, creatures that had once been considered too dangerous to control, now bound to humanity by something more powerful than mere command? The answer, it seemed, was inevitable. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. They had believed that strength came from technology, from advanced weapons and vast fleets. But humanity had proven that strength came from the ability to unite with the forces of nature, to understand and respect the wild. And as this new power began to spread, it became clear that humanity would not use it for the conquest of others. Instead, they sought peace, understanding, and unity. They had no desire to dominate. They had no need to subjugate. Their goal was to coexist, to build something stronger than the broken systems of war and destruction that had defined the galaxy for centuries. Yet this quiet strength, this humble approach to power, was exactly what made humanity so dangerous. They weren't trying to be a threat. They weren't seeking to control the galaxy. But in their quest for peace and unity, they had created something far more potent than any weapon of mass destruction. They had created an alliance, a bond that stretched across species and planets, and one that no force in the galaxy could break. This bond made humanity a force that couldn't be ignored. It made them a species that would shape the future of the galaxy in ways no one could have predicted. The political elite of the galaxy were left with no answers. The fear that had once seemed like an overreaction had now become a reality. Humanity was a force that could not be defeated through traditional means. They didn't need armies or fleets. They needed only their bond with the creatures they had tamed, the trust they had earned, and the will to fight for what they believed in. And with this power, humanity would become a central figure in the galaxy's future, not through conquest, but through something far more profound, the ability to unite the wild and the civilized, to build alliances that transcended species, and to create a future where peace wasn't just a dream, but a reality. In the end, humanity had done what no one thought possible. They had not only survived, they had risen, becoming a species whose legacy would be defined not by war, but by unity, compassion, and an unwavering connection to the very forces of nature itself. And as the galaxy watched, one thing became certain: humanity had become the greatest, and most unpredictable, force in the galaxy. The galaxy had always been a place of endless conflict. Alliances formed, fractured, and reformed again in an eternal cycle of power struggles, betrayals, and warfare. But now, with humanity's unexpected rise, something was different. It wasn't just the technology or the strategic brilliance of their military that set them apart. It was something far deeper, something that had never been seen before, a species that had learned to live in harmony with the wild, with creatures that once inspired terror across the stars. Humanity's ability to command the most dangerous predators and bend them to their will was a game changer, and the galaxy had no idea how to respond. For centuries, the galaxy had assumed that the key to dominance lay in firepower, fleets of warships, and the overwhelming might of advanced technology. When Earth had first entered the galactic stage, they had been nothing more than a curiosity, primitive, undeveloped, and to many inconsequential. But as the humans began to demonstrate their uncanny ability to control the fiercest of beasts, the very creatures that had once terrorized their own world and beyond, the galaxy was forced to reevaluate everything it thought it knew. How could a species that had been so helpless on its own world suddenly become a power capable of commanding the universe's most lethal predators? This wasn't just about controlling animals. It wasn't a simple mastery of brute force or an understanding of biology. No, humanity's true power lay in something far more profound, a bond, an unspoken connection, between themselves and the creatures they had tamed. The wild beasts of Earth, once driven by instinct, hunger, and aggression, now stood by the humans as protectors, companions, and even symbols of unity. These creatures didn't fight because they were forced to, they fought because they chose to. It was a bond of mutual respect, one that transcended species, one that no one had anticipated. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had relied on technology to exert control over their environment. They had built weapons, fleets, and automated systems to defend themselves and to expand their power. But no one had considered the possibility that a species might not need those tools. Humanity, with its ability to work alongside the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy, had rendered traditional power structures obsolete. A single human, with nothing but a bond to a predator from Earth, could now stand up against entire fleets of alien warriors. It wasn't about strength. It was about the trust between the human and the creature, a connection so profound that it could not be replicated by any technology or force of arms. But the fear was not just about the humans themselves. The fear came from the realization that if humanity could do this with predators from their own world, what might they accomplish with creatures from across the galaxy? What would happen when they began forming bonds with beings far more dangerous than anything Earth had ever known? The implications were terrifying. If humanity could earn the trust of these beasts, what could they do with them? What power could they wield, and how could anyone, even the mightiest galactic empire, stand against them? And that was the crux of the issue. The galaxy's most powerful civilizations had spent centuries, even millennia, developing their technologies, perfecting their weapons, and consolidating their influence. But humanity had achieved something they could never have foreseen: the ability to tame the untamable, to win the loyalty of the galaxy's most fearsome creatures without the need for dominance or subjugation. In this, humanity had gained an edge that no one could match, an edge that no one could control. While the galaxy had focused on the acquisition of technology, humanity had focused on something far more profound, a deep understanding of nature, of the creatures that inhabited it, and the way in which all life could be interconnected. This wasn't just a matter of the humans taming beasts. It was about the way in which they had unlocked a fundamental truth: that strength does not come from domination. It comes from unity. It comes from the ability to connect, to communicate, and to form bonds that transcend the barriers of species, biology, and even fear. In the universe of endless wars and shifting allegiances, humanity had discovered something that no one else had. The key to peace and power was not in technology, not in weapons, but in cooperation and understanding. The response from the galactic powers was swift and brutal. The Council, once confident in its position as the ruling force of the galaxy, now found itself in a precarious position. They could not ignore humanity's rise, but they could not easily confront it, either. The traditional methods of warfare, fleets of warships, armies of soldiers, and overwhelming firepower, had proven ineffective against a species that didn't rely on those things. Humanity had no need for armies or fleets. They had something far more powerful: a bond with nature itself, an understanding of the creatures that ruled the wild, and the loyalty of those creatures. And it was this bond that made them a force to be reckoned with, one that could not be easily destroyed or defeated. As the galaxy watched, the tide began to turn. humanity's rise was not one of conquest or oppression. It was one of cooperation, of forging alliances where there had once been enemies. It was the ability to see beyond the boundaries of species and recognize the value in all forms of life. And in this new era, humanity stood as a shining example of what was possible when a species chose to work together, not just with each other, but with the very forces of nature that governed the universe. What had started as a simple ability to tame Earth's predators had grown into something far greater. It was a philosophy, a way of life, one that rejected the old systems of power and control in favor of something more meaningful: unity. And as the galaxy watched humanity's rise, one thing became clear: the future of the universe would not be shaped by weapons or warships. It would be shaped by the bonds that humanity had forged, the connections that transcended species, and the power that came not from domination, but from mutual respect and understanding. This was humanity's gift to the galaxy, one that would forever change the course of history. And in the end, it wasn't just the humans who would benefit from this new world. It would be all of life, in all its forms, united in a way that had never been seen before.